What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another video on the Z. Today we are diving into a bit of a controversial topic, which is hydro e-brakes. Should you have one? Do you need one? And what's the best way to go about installing one? Let's jump right into it. Before we jump into it though, if you watched my last video and you saw at the very end, I had some issues with the Z that I was a little confused about. Confusion is now gone. I figured out what the issue was, so I want to show you guys that. And if you did miss the last video, I will put it up in this corner right here so you can check that out. In the last video, we replaced this compression arm here. You can see I have it taken out there. And got it swapped out, went for a test drive, it felt fine, and when I came back home, I heard a weird clunk and the suspension felt loose again. So I thought I broke the ball joint again, which is what happened the first time around. That's why I had to replace it. Thankfully, that is not what happened. It was a mistake on my end. These new compression arms from Moog came as just the ball joints themselves. They were actually missing a taper adapter that Nissan decided to engineer into this whole design. I think it's kind of goofy, but whatever. My fault for not realizing it, and I guess Moog's fault for not including it, which is weird because they did on the last ball joints I bought from them, but whatever. So I got some of those taper adapters from Nissan. Here's a part number. With these on hand, I should be able to just slip them over the ball joint and then bolt it back together, and we should have no more issues. I'll throw those in and fix the car up off camera. Not going to bore you guys with that again, because like I said, today's focus is going to be on hydro e-brakes. Let me show you guys what I've got on hand and how we're going to tackle this. For the hydro handle itself, went with Part Shop Max, their nice ball bearing handle with a Willwood master on it. Really nice piece. It's got an adjustable handle up here with their little logo on it. So that's going to be step one, is just getting the handle mounted in the car, figuring out where I want it and how I want to mount it. And then after we get that mounted, we can turn our attention to running some lines and getting it actually hooked up. Now when it comes to that, there are two main ways you can install a hydro. You can either do it in line, which just means you're going to tap into the rear brake lines and the handle will connect to the factory brake lines of your existing rear calipers. Or you can do a separate setup and run a dual caliper, meaning you have a rear caliper designated only to the hydro handbrake, and then you have the regular factory calipers that are still operating as your foot brake. That's what I'm going to be doing, just because I already have the Part Shop Max drop knuckles that have the additional ears for dual calipers. But like I said, we'll get into that after I get this handle mounted in the car. That's going to be step number one. So I guess before we get too far into this, I should explain what a hydro e-brake even is. Although if you're watching this video, you probably know, but just in case, a hydro e-brake is a handle that attaches to your rear brakes just to lock the rear wheels up. Pretty simple, very common in the drifting world. I believe it's pretty common in the rally world too. I wouldn't consider it a must-have, but like I said, it's definitely a popular addition to most drift cars. All right, first step, we need to make some room so we can actually figure out where this handle's gonna go. Let's get this thing out of the way. Let's go ahead and take the center console out too, get a bit more room. All right, trying to show you as best I can in here. So this is probably the most important part of the whole thing, is getting this handle right where you want it. Now everybody's a little bit different. A lot of people will mount it to the side over here, and that way it doesn't interfere with anything. That works. I don't really like the angle that you have to pull the handle though. It's like straight back. I'd rather tuck it in here and then be able to pull the handle towards me like that instead of this way, if that makes any sense. But that's going to take a bit of modification because, as you can see, it interferes with this guy here and a little bit of this. Obviously we'll move the carpet aside, and it's just going to take some fine tuning to really get this set up like right where I want it and to have it still be able to work. With the handbrake out of the way, you can see I'm going to start by just cutting this, getting this out of the way, and then we'll come up with a plan to mount it. All right, so you can see we cut that little corner out there. If you're doing this at home, keep in mind there is a little metal piece behind that, so you will have to cut through that. You can see on that side, that little metal like L-shaped thing. So I ended up cutting through that, and now we've got a lot of room to work with. But we're not ready yet. I need to clean all this up so I have a good place to weld to. So we're gonna get rid of this, and get down to bare steel here. I don't know what this is. This is really weird. It's like tape almost. Literally looks and feels like duct tape, but it's kind of gross behind there. But Anyways, like I said, because I was cutting through metal, I did put a towel over my seat. I didn't want that getting sparks on it. So, little word of advice there. I'm gonna start cleaning this up, getting some good material to weld to, and then I'll show you guys how we're gonna get this thing mounted. All right, got it all cleaned up, looking good. Now I can work on making a little pedestal for the hydro itself to mount to. So I still need to fine tune placement and get the hydro exactly where I want it, but before I do that, I do want to work on making a little pedestal to weld the hydro to. Now you don't just want to weld the hydro straight to your factory trans tunnel. The reason for that is the factory trans tunnel on a lot of cars, especially older ones like S chassis and things along those lines, the trans tunnel is pretty thin sheet metal. You can weld the hydro in, it'll probably work for a little while, and after some abuse, it'll start to actually like tear the metal, and I've seen people rip the hydro straight out of the car. Don't want to do that. So I'm going to build a little structure, pedestal kind of box thing that will weld to the side of the trans tunnel and the top and really kind of triangulate it all. And then that way the hydro can get mounted to that and it should be really solid. Of course, I'll take you guys along the way, so let's get to it. And if anybody's curious how I got this cleaned up without just like taking a grinder to it, I was using a little wire wheel on a drill, and then I went back over it and just wiped it down with lacquer thinner or acetone, and that kind of took the majority of it off. Obviously it's not perfect. If I wanted to leave it like this, I could spend some more time and really clean it up, but I know I'm gonna get in there with a grinder so I can weld some things, so good enough for now. All right, that took way longer than it should have. Don't be picky like me and just buy one of the off-the-shelf things. I know a few different brands make like bolt-in ones. That'll work just fine. I was being extra picky, and it's gonna be worth it in the long run. But I was being picky with where the hydro was sitting and how it was angled. I'd kind of mentioned in a different clip, I wanted it angled slightly towards me and not just like straight. It'll make a big difference, and ultimately this is gonna be a permanent deal, so I figured might as well do it once and do it right. But there are much easier ways to go about this. It also would have been easier if I had a way nicer welder and some better tools like a good vise and things like that, but whatever. We got it done. It doesn't look great. I'm not super happy with it, but at the end of the day, a little bit of paint and the carpet and the center console and all that stuff are all gonna cover it up, so it's not that big of a deal. Let me show you what I got. So this is what we're working with. You can see it's literally just a little plate that kind of comes off the tunnel and gives me a bit of room, so I could put the hydro in just like that. Looks good. You can see we've got enough room back there for that fitting and the remote reservoir kind of deal. So it's gonna work just fine. Like I said, most of those ugly welds and things will get covered up, so it'll be all right. Decided to give myself a bit more room under here. You can see I chopped that metal bracket that was holding this little, whatever this is, up. I accidentally broke it there, but no more metal here, a lot more room for the fitting on the hydro in the back, because I'm going to be making a hard line off that, and I thought the extra room would be good. All right, so I got the hydro e-brake handle tacked in. I didn't weld it all the way in because I still have to get the line in. I got to just make sure everything's good, but it's tacked in. I believe it's in the right spot, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Although my welds aren't the best and my little fabrication skills aren't too good either, at the end of the day, most of it's covered up with the carpet, and as long as it's solid, it doesn't get ripped out of the car, it should be perfectly fine. And I'm at least confident in that. So let me show you what it looks like. I didn't put the interior completely back together because I do still have to run the line, and that is going to be its own process. But you can still get a good idea of how it's going to look. You probably saw in one of those clips the center console is just kind of thrown off to the side. I tried to test fit it real quick because I wanted to see what it would look like in there, and it's going to require quite a bit of trimming. This definitely could have been done to retain all the factory interior pieces, and it would have looked a little bit better for like a street car, but really my priority was a comfortable position and serviceability. I want to be able to get to the master easily. I want to be able to service it, to change out that line if it ends up leaking, or reach those fittings, or whatever the case may be. I just wanted to be able to reach it all. And to me, that is a much higher priority than having the interior look perfect, because one of these days this car is going to get gutted and caged and end up a full race car. So if I'm going to do something as permanent as welding in a plate and this handbrake, I'd much rather do it with the future in mind than just try to keep the interior looking factory. So something I mentioned a bit earlier was there are two ways to run a hydro e-brake: inline and dual caliper, meaning completely independent of the factory braking system. I'm not going to go into full detail, but I will touch on the pros and cons of each. If you wanted to go inline, I think that's a very good way to start. It's definitely the cheapest. The install is the easiest. There are quite a lot of companies that just make bolt-on kits. You just tap into the rear brake lines and you're done. And then for dual caliper, it is quite a bit more expensive, mostly because you're buying a whole nother set of rear calipers, and then you need a way to attach those rear calipers, so you either need completely new rear spindles like I have, or some companies make bolt-on kits where you just buy like a little bracket that adapts another caliper to the rear hub. Either way, you got to buy that, you have to buy the calipers, and then you have to buy lines. Again, there are companies that make full line kits, otherwise you can make them yourself from scratch, which is what I'm going to be doing. The biggest benefit to running dual rear calipers over an inline setup is brake feel. So because an inline setup is tapping into the factory brake lines, it can alter the way your brakes feel if you're using it. Now, if you're someone like me who has spent most of my time drifting without a functioning handbrake, I rely heavily on the foot brake to make minor adjustments in the car, right? If I'm chasing someone and I don't want to get too close, I'll do a little left foot braking. If I want to add a lot of angle, I'll just jab the brakes real quick. That's how I learned, just because I haven't had a functioning handbrake in a lot of my cars, or the handbrake just wasn't very good. If you're someone who has been drifting maybe with an S chassis for a long time and it has a great factory handbrake and you've gotten used to using it, then maybe an inline setup won't be that bad for you. It really just depends on your driving style and what your overall plan is, and budget, of course. So those are all things to consider if you are thinking of getting a hydro e-brake. The other reason I went with a dual caliper setup is because, like I said, this car is eventually going to end up at a higher level, let's say like a Pro-Am level, right? Caged, more power, competition-esque, if you will. And because of that, I'd rather just do this whole setup once and never have to look back and think, oh, I wish I had done this, or have to redo something down the road. That's just the way I am. And thankfully, it was in the budget, kind of. I'll touch on that in another video because, yeah, that's a whole nother story. But that's why I went with the dual caliper setup. It's definitely not necessary. Like I said, this whole thing could have been done way cheaper, and it could have just been a little inline deal on the factory brakes and been completely fine. But that's what I chose to do, and that's why. Hopefully you got something out of that. And the last question on this topic is, do you need one? No, not at all. Like I said, I've drifted for years with no working handbrake, or a not very good handbrake. If you guys have been watching the channel for a while, you will know there was a point in time that this car had no functioning handbrake. I mean, like, you couldn't even park because the handbrake did nothing. It was just disconnected. That didn't stop me from drifting. I had a ton of fun on the track, and like I said, you just learn and you adapt, and then you learn a new skill, like how to use the foot brake to make adjustments. I think that's really important. I think it's important not to rely only on the handbrake, and a lot of times you'll see people who learn in a car with a hydro and that's all they know how to drive. Don't be that guy. So if you're at a point where you are comfortable in your car, you've kind of mastered the basics, then yeah, get a hydro. Absolutely. It is a great tool to have. It's very helpful, and I would suggest it after you've gotten to that point. But if you're just getting into drifting and you're trying to get a car set up, that is the last thing you should worry about. Throw some good brake pads on the back, use the factory handbrake, and really just learn to drift without it. I guarantee you it'll make you a better driver in the long run. At the end of the day, all of this is my opinion. Take it with a grain of salt. If you don't agree with me, that is perfectly fine. Drop a comment down below. I'm curious to know what your take is on this. I'm going to keep plugging away on this. I will catch back up with you guys in just a bit, but I wanted to show you a little teaser of what I've got cooking for brakes. I'm not going to show you the whole deal in this video. That's going to be in another one, just because it is a much more in-depth process than just slapping on some new calipers, and this is why. That's all you get for now. If you want to see more, make sure you're subscribed. Like I said, I'm going to keep working on this thing. I'll catch up with you in a few.
6.5 hours later.
Now, I could have just bought a kit offline and used some soft lines. Probably would have been done by now, but I always wanted to try making my own hard lines, and I figured this would be a good time to figure it out. So you can see I already have a fitting back here, and then just bent the line in a U. And well, that's about as far as I've got. Definitely took me a few tries to get the flaring tool right. So I will show you guys how to use that as I get further along with these hard lines. That's gonna be a wrap for tonight, so I will pick back up with you guys in just a few. And we're back in the garage, back to working on this hard line for the Hydro e-brake. At the same place we left off last time. So the next step is going to be figuring out where I want to drill a hole in the trans tunnel area of the car so I can drop that line through and then run it to the back of the car underneath. Alright, so we pulled the exhaust off and got the drive shaft out, and now we have full access to the trans tunnel. So I'm going to drill a hole through the top, somewhere up there, poke that brake line through, and then start routing it to the back here.
12 seconds later.
So you ever have one of those ideas that you think is a really good idea, and then a few minutes into it, you realize probably not the best idea? That's me right now. After I took the exhaust and drive shaft out, I got into the car and was about to start drilling into the trans tunnel. And then I took a look around and realized, this is kind of a dumb idea. There is so much more room on the interior, and it will be way safer and more accessible to run the line through the interior of the car and then just poke it out of the rear wheel wells and have it connect to the brakes that way. I don't know why I didn't think of that from the beginning. It's going to be a whole lot easier just to run it inside. Let me give you a little breakdown of what I'm thinking about doing, and then I'll actually get to doing it. As you can see, I haven't done much, but the line can poke through this little hole here and then run through this structure. And then it should be able to come out in the trunk here, either out one of those holes, or I may just drill a hole in the middle, or maybe even up a little bit higher. And then these are the wheel wells on this side and this side here. So I'll just run a T somewhere in this area and then split it from side to side. And then I'll just be able to poke it out of the wheel well like here or here. And that'll come out probably around here is what I'm thinking, or maybe a little bit further back. It should make this job a whole lot easier than what I was originally planning on doing. Life lesson there. Don't be afraid to change plans halfway through. If you find an easier, more efficient way of doing something, go for it. Obviously there's certain circumstances where there's not really like a turning back point, but you get what I'm saying. Also, if you were wondering, I pulled these guys out. These things go in these corners here. They may add a bit of structure, I'm sure they do, but really with this big strut tower brace still in here, I'm not worried about not having these. Plus, look how many bolts held these things in. This is crazy. Well, here's to me never leaving good enough alone. So we're in the trunk here. My plan was to use this little T-fitting and mount it somewhere over here. Maybe to the bottom like that, or maybe up here. And then I thought, if I'm gonna mount it down here, I need to get the sound deadening out of the way so it's, you know, nice, flat, clean metal to mount to. And then this happened. Yep, that's dry ice. And now I'm removing all the sound deadening. I'm gonna clean up the whole trunk. I'll probably end up putting a coat of paint or something down here just to make it look nice. Because if something's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. That may not be true in all situations, but in this one I figured I'd go the little extra step just to clean it up and make it look a bit better. I know I'm not going to regret it in the future. At least I hope not. I might regret having some sound deadening out when I'm driving this thing on the street for hundreds of miles on Drift Week, but whatever. I could live with it. This is me telling you to not do any of this. This is way overkill and honestly kind of pointless, but it'll be worth it in the long run, at least to me. I know the trunk's gonna look a lot better. Not that it looks that much better now because it's, well, I'll show you. So we got all that sound deadening out. It looks better-ish. Eventually I'm gonna end up putting like a coat of paint or something over it all. I even went as far as removing the piece that bolts the spare tire down so I can have more of a flat trunk. Again, completely unnecessary, but like I said, if I'm already doing it, I might as well overdo it. So I'm gonna keep plugging away at this. I realize this video has gone completely off track of what the original subject was. So let me at least show you my plan for the Hydro e-brake line. It's definitely not getting done in this video, or at least not tonight. But I can show you guys the idea I have, and I think it's gonna work pretty well. All right, like I said, this video has been all over the place, and I apologize for that. It was supposed to be focused on one thing, but clearly I can't do that. But let me at least show you what the line setup is going to be for the Hydros, because I've kind of got it in place. It's not hooked up or ready to use or anything, but it's there. So starting at the Hydro itself, I already showed you guys that little U-bend. It's not hooked up right now, but you get the idea. Then it's gonna run straight back. Obviously I'll have to manage that a bit better. Pokes through this little hole here, comes down into this cubby. Let me get some light back there. And you can see it just runs right along there. I'll probably clamp that down or something. I will be putting a grommet on that hole, but it pokes through that little spot right there. And then if we come back to the trunk, you can see where it pokes through right here. So from that spot there, it will tee off, go to the driver's side wheel well, as well as the passenger side wheel well. And that should be all I need. Now this was still a bunch of work. I know I said it was going to be easier than routing it under the car, and I do still believe that to be true. I just have been taking a few extra steps to get it done the way I want on the inside of the car, but like I said, it could be done a bit easier, especially if you were using soft lines and you can just kind of route them wherever you want. I probably should have gone that route, but like I said, I really wanted to learn how to use hard lines, how to flare it, how to bend it, how to do all that. And I realized I didn't even get into that in this video. So again, I apologize for that. But it will be in the next one, because I'm gonna finish this up, get it all hooked up, and I'm dying to go test it out. But I know if I keep dragging this on through this video, it's gonna end up like the longest video ever, and I think a lot of it's pretty mundane, boring work. So on that note, that is going to be a wrap for this video. I hope you guys learned something, or at least were entertained by me kind of running all over the place. To summarize everything, do you need a Hydro e-brake? No, you don't. I think it's a great tool, and I'm really excited to have it on this car. But I managed for quite a while without one, not only in this car, but in the majority of my drift cars beforehand. I actually have never had a Hydro. I've had good functioning handbrakes, but never an independent Hydro e-brake. So like I said, I'm excited for that. It's definitely going to be a tool that I believe will elevate my driving, and I'm looking forward to learning how to use it. Drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Do you have a Hydro in your car? Do you want one? And would you do it as elaborate as I did, or would you do a real simple inline setup? I'm curious. Anyways, give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and as always, I will catch you guys in the next one.